to salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب مبين والقرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت من اتخذ إلهه هواه أفأنت تكون عليه وكيلا صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are in the Mawsam of Arba'in. Arba'in is coming up next week. And, generally speaking, we are also in the Mawsam of Aza of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam. And when we started this series of speeches to talk about what happened in Karbala, if you remember, one of the things that Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam declared when he was leaving Medina was that he's leaving Medina to seek Islah for the community, reformation of the community, of the ummah of the ummah of the Prophet. Today, I want you to help me by listening to try and analyze and understanding the mission of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam in its relevance for what's happening in the world, in the global community today. Question: is humanity today going in a direction where we can make the argument that there is a need for Islah, there is a need for reformation of the total humanity, globally? And the answer is definitely yes. Because if you start observing things, and I want our young audience to really pay attention, because the dynamics of the world is changing, and it is changing drastically, and it's not going in the right direction. It's going in a really, really bad direction. And we really need to focus in and pay attention to those things, because your future is going to depend on how you understand it and what you decide to do about it. So this question of Islam is something that is absolutely necessary. And Islam, at one time in the recent history, had become a focus of an institution that the Western civilization was going to oppose against. In the 90s, there is a guy by the name of Samuel Huntington, who is a professor at Harvard University. I don't know if he still is. And I'm quoting this from lectures that I've heard from both Sunni sources and Shia sources, because when we are living in a world whose dynamics are changing, we need to see what scholars and academicians are saying about how, as Muslims, we can face this and what it is that we need to do. So this guy, Samuel Huntington, back in the 90s, before 9/11, he wrote an article and a thesis which basically outlined what he called the clash of civilizations. And he put two things aside. One civilization was the civilization of the Western world. And then after arguments, whatever, he narrowed it down that the other civilization was the religion of Islam. So back in the 90s, when people were reading this, they looked at it, this is an academic thesis, and it was put away, on the side, until 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, the neocons, who were the right-wingers of the American society, picked this article up and turned it into a prescription of what they are going to do from that point on, towards the Muslim world. And they used this as an argument to present against the wars that they started to wage against the Muslim community. Just as a reference, $7 trillion were spent after 9/11 until approximately when recently the US Army withdrew from Afghanistan. And they let those people that they said they were going to oust to go back into the ruling again. So, in other words, the achievement that was cited as the reason why they went for war was not achieved. And $7 trillion were spent. I just want our youngsters to think about this. What is this number, this $7 trillion? We say it, but in actuality, what does it mean? You know what it means? If you spend $10 million a day from the time that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was born until today, we would not spend $7 trillion. $10 million a day. This is the amount of money that was expended in this idea of the clash of civilization from back then. The problem now is that this clash of civilization has become somewhat subdued. Why? Because there is a clash between the civilization within itself. Today, when you go and you look at what is happening, and you look at the politicians that are standing up and talking about elections and why they should be elected, you have two factions, that are completely different. And one extreme, they are talking about liberalism that is out of hand, and on the other hand, they are talking about conservatism, which is out of hand. And Islam now has become an institution that both of these extremes are using for their own purposes. The liberal world is using Islam for its diversity and said, we are accepting this diversity, therefore we are in sort of support for the Muslims as an ummah, although we don't agree with their ideology. And by any means, Islam does not agree with the ideology of liberalism. And we'll talk about that in a minute. On the other hand, value-wise, the conservatives, we sort of agree with. But on a basis of diversity and ethnic differences, there is a difference between us and the conservative people. And this is basically where we are stuck, right now. But we live in it. We live in these societies. And our children go to these schools where a lot of these ideas are beginning to be talked about. And my dear brothers and sisters, if there is anything that is relevant that we need to talk about right now to protect our faith and our culture, these are the issues that need to start to be discussed from the minbar as well as in your individual homes. There was a time, and these are many, many theories, and I'm not going to go into the specific details. I just want to outline and highlight, but really illustrate what's going on. There was a time when moral ethics and ethnicity and ethics were based on religious beliefs. This is in the Muslim world, in the Christian world, in the Judaic world, in the Hindu world, whatever world you wanted to go in. Our principles on morality, what is right and what is wrong, were based upon religious teachings, and they were controlling how we behave, regardless of whether, there was this religion or that religion. Even as Muslims, back in the day, we were told we have to pray namaz, we have to fast, we have to do all of this. Many a times we never questioned it, we just did it. There was no why should we do this and why should we do that. We were just doing it. And the thing that made us do it was because the other principles, the moral principles, the ethical principles were something we could agree with. Lying is bad, cheating is bad, killing is bad, generosity is, all these principles, what we call the universal principles, we were agreeing with. So when we were told to do something, we were kind of doing it. And everything was kind of normal. And then as humanity evolved from that, we came to the age of science and reason. Now everybody wanted to have a logical answer to why we were doing what we were doing. So this became the reason, the basis of what our moral conduct and our ethical conduct were based upon: science, logic, and reason. And that was also not so bad. But as things started to evolve into the modern concept now, our ethics and morals, my dear brothers and sisters, that is being spread out there is neither by logic or reason, it's neither by our faith, but it is based upon how you and I feel about things. It's based on our feelings, what I identify with, what is agreeable to me, what my inner self, wants me to believe. And this verse of the Holy Quran that just I cited, it's verse number 43 in Surah Al-Furqan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So he says, أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. That Allah is talking to the Prophet and He says to him, do you see these people who are making gods out of their lowly desires? Their desires, their feelings, they are making those things their God. And then he questions it, أَفَأَنْتَ تَكُونَ عَلَيْهِ وَكِيلًا. That do you want to be responsible for these kinds of people? There are some versions of the occasions of the revelation of this. It is said that the Quraysh back in the day were trapped in a kind of a situation, and as they were moving out of Mecca, for whatever reason, they came across a stone that looked really beautiful, and they called this the stone of happiness. And they started worshiping this stone because it matched with whatever lowly desires that they had, and started to worship it. An Arab was moving around with his camels or whatever, is passing by, and he wants to touch these stones. He wanted his animals to touch these stones so that somehow these animals could get blessed by this stone. For whatever reason, the animals who touched these stones started to go wild, and they started to run away from that place. And this basically says, do you see these people? They are making gods out of whatever they want to make their gods. My dear brothers and sisters, today, we are talking about a world in which there are people, human beings, who say that they want to identify themselves as animals or a cat. Now, rather than admonishing these people or sending them to a shrink, to a psychiatrist, and say, there is something wrong with you. You're a human, and you identify yourself with some kind of an animal, and try and fix the problem, they actually promote the problem by creating and putting a litter box inside the bathrooms in the high schools that these kids live in, so that they can go to the bathrooms the way cats do. They're not stopping this. They're in fact encouraging this. And this kind of how I feel, it's one of the things that has really gone, way astray, this whole idea about these feelings, is that people now are beginning to identify with these low desires that are within themselves, and they come out and say, I want to feel like this, and because God created me like this, that's why I am not to be blamed, and I will live the way I want to. They extract and eliminate God away from this. You know whose sunnah this is? Anybody? Any of the kids? Who was the first one that blamed God? فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. Shaitan tells to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he refused to do sujood to Adam. Shaitan tells Allah that because you misguided me, that is why I want to have this respite until the day of judgment. Shaitan is telling God, your fault. You made me the way I am, and that because the way you made me I am disobeying you. And this has become the real primordial concern, of the problems that you and I are having, today. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. In a hadith, and this is a hadith, my dear brothers and sisters, we need to really pay attention to, because it's not lenient, it is strong. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that under the sun and before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no greater idol of worshipping, that is other than low desires, that is worship. When a person worship his low desires. He falls into the trap of his low desires. So there is nothing under the sun that imitates shirk the way that imitates shirk. Amirul Mu'minin Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says that worshipping these low desires, worshipping this idea of what I'm feeling, and I want to be what I'm feeling, worshipping these low desires is the enemy of the intellect. Here I want to pause for a second, and I want to say, when we talk about the age of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islam, we say, during that was the age of Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah doesn't mean that those people were dumb. Jahiliyyah did not mean those people could not read or write. And even in today's term, when we refer to people, or where Allah refers to people as Jahil, it's not about people who are uneducated, that they have not gone to universities. That is not Jahalat. Jahalat is when your temptations, your ability to resist your low desires is overcome, your intellect, your ability to think becomes completely neutralized because of your hawa, because of your desires, because of your shahwa, you become a jahil. This is the definition of jahiliyyah. And if we look around us, my dear brothers and sisters, jahiliyyah is spreading. Every day it's spreading. And what do we need to do about this? We can't look the other way. And to say that it becomes the responsibility of the masjid or the community, to try and talk about these things and train our kids, not to do this kind of thing. This is not the only way. Let me cite an example for you. Today, under the age, the majority of young people under the age of 30 have no faith. They have become either atheists or agnostics. Majority of the people. And if you go to the Nordic region, in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and all of these places, that percentage is almost 70%. Young people are completely beginning to reject religion, completely rejecting faith of any kind. If we go back in the day, when we were in Afghanistan or India or Pakistan or Africa, when I was growing up, when we hear about divorce, it was like, astaghfirullah, really? It's a big deal that a husband and a wife are breaking up. We start looking at those people in a negative way. Today, that has become like an alternative. I can't get along with you, you can't get along with me, boom, divorce. And the number of divorces is increasing day by day, not only in the non-Muslim world, also in the Islamic world. How many of you people that are sitting down know of cousins, uncles, aunts who are going through divorce? Many. This was unheard of back in the day. That was not an easy thing. Before a couple decides to get into this idea of divorce, they would have to really think about it. They go for counseling, and the families try to, resolve the problems. Today, you don't want it, khalas, you are free. Just free yourself from this marriage and go and have your freedom. This becomes so easy for people. More than 50% of the children that are going to be born in America in the next decade are going to be born outside of marriage. This is another statistics. More than 50% of the children that are going to be born in America in the next few years, according to statistics, are going to be born outside of marriage. And we have to understand one thing, that if these institutions that you and I call a family does have no value in the society, what is going to become of the children that are going to grow outside this environment? What is the training that these children are going to have? This is the reason why things are beginning to fall apart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses it in many other places, that be careful who of your shahwat. Be careful Let not these desires overpower you, that you stop thinking logically and you stop thinking without reason and submit yourself to these desires, because it's not going to take you to the right place. Just like the Arab guy who took his camels and he touched the stone thinking he's trying to get blessings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made everything just scatter away. It created ruination. Today, this Western world is trying to redefine, and I want to hear you guys to hear, because it's not about man and woman and equality and inequality. It is very important that we understand what Islam calls a gender role. What is the role of a father in a family? What is the role of a mother in a family? Allah has not mixed these roles. There are some things that the mother and father have to do together. Yes, but there is a role for the father and there is a role for the mother. And before young people enter into the institution of marriage, they have to have an understanding of this. We see today in our communities, and this is so sad, because I see it with my families, I see it in our communities, that there are young men and women who have crossed into their late 20s and have entered into their 30s, and they cannot find a spouse. They can't find a husband, or they cannot find a wife. And if you really prod into them, it all comes down to what they want out of a marriage, and many a times these wants that they talk about have got nothing to do with Islam and have got nothing to do with gender roles. Islam requires, humanity requires, logic requires that a family works as a harmonious unit, because it is the brick that builds the wall of humanity. If you put a weak brick in this wall, the whole wall collapses. It doesn't work. But yet, we are somehow really focusing on making weak bricks because of these low desires. I want my rights. I want my career. I want this, I want that. I want a woman who is obedient, and so on and so forth. I mean, what has happened to let us work together in obedience? When Imam Ali alayhi salatu was salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, after his marriage to Fatima to Zahra, this just came into my mind when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked Imam Ali, how did you find your wife Fatima to Zahra? What did he say? He said, I have found the best partner in my journey towards the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the partnership that men and women have to try and seek, because that is the only protection that you have towards a happy, fulfilling life. Otherwise, my dear brothers and sisters, you know, we were talking the other day outside in the parking lot. How are we functioning today? Think about it. Okay, our kids are not eating dinner with us, because the son has a different schedule, the daughter has a different schedule, the wife and the husband have different schedules. We are all throwing food in the microwave, putting it in, watching TV or doing whatever, and we're eating. That's the unit of the family. That's what is happening today. You know, maybe in some of your homes it's not happening, but in many homes, this is what is happening. That the family unit cannot sit down together and talk and discuss. And you know, you don't have to talk about deen, but you can talk about each other's problems and share your problems and work the future of the family as a whole happy unit. It doesn't happen. And we are losing this battle, my dear brothers and sisters. So the first step and the most important step to face this calamity that is just started, this has not even materialized to its fullest extent. Social media and internet right now is the teachers of the young kids that we have today. A 2-year-old or a 3-year-old is an expert at operating the iPad to watch the show that they want to. Seriously, I have a granddaughter who is expert at doing it, you know, looking at her iPad, and she cannot even ask for food. Her language is not good yet. She can't speak properly. But she can turn and switch on and work that iPad like an expert. Sometimes I have to learn from her. And that is the source of the information that all of our youngsters are getting. If Muawiyah could spread in those days when there was no internet, there was no radio, there was no television, and he could spread the rumors against Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, such that when he was martyred in Kufa and the news reached Sham, the people in Damascus, in Sham, were saying, what was Ali doing in the mosque? The propaganda that Muawiyah was able to spread without the technology that you and I have today was such that Amirul Mu'mineen, one of the Khulafa of Rashidun, was questioned about what he was doing at the mosque. Can you imagine today, with internet and these iPads and social media, the power of the propaganda that is spreading out over here and the effect that it is having on our children? Don't underestimate it, my dear brothers and sisters. Don't underestimate this. If tomorrow your son or your daughter, and I remind this to myself as well, because none of us are safe from this. Believe me, you could be the guy who is reciting tahajjud every day, who has memorized the Quran every day. Your child is still at risk of the media that we are living in. They're still at risk at it. And if your child comes home one of these days and says to you that I want to ... and something that you cannot ever even imagine, you can bang your head against the wall, you can't do anything about it. You will not be able to do anything about it. And these, I talk to young people because you know what? You are being programmed right now. And, please youngsters, listen. You are being programmed to chase after the things that is not going to bring you happiness in your future life. It's just going to create chaos. The freedom that we are espoused to be living, the freedom of, the living that we are in America today, it is the freedom not of anything, it is the freedom to pursue these low desires. That's what the freedom is. That I can do whatever I want. I can party whenever I want. And when I go to these parties, I can do whatever. That's the freedom. But what they don't recognize, and you and I sometimes do not recognize, that once we become slaves of these low desires within us, that freedom does not mean anything, because you are now slaves of something else that is a lot more harmful to you and me. Let us be careful, my dear brothers and sisters. This Islah that Imam Hussein ﷺ was chasing after, when he went out for the mission of Karbala, has now evolved into something that is much bigger. And we are not talking about going and doing reformation of the community of this world. We're talking about, my dear brothers and sisters, reformation of ourselves, our families, our communities. This is the reformation that we need to focus on. I'm sorry if I sound, but I think this was the most serious things that we need to talk about. Because if we are not careful, this masjid is going to lose its purpose, because 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I don't know what's going to happen here. We will have all kinds of things happening. And not only will it be happening, it will be approved, because it's all going to become mainstream and acceptable by everybody. Just like today, divorce is accepted. Just like today, all kinds of things that we would never think about back in the day is completely accepted in the societies that we live in. Let's be careful. Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. According to some riwayat, these are also the days that mark the shahadat of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam. 28th Safar is another day, and inshallah, those are the days we'll have the majlisun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, these are the days of Imam, and I just wanted to describe one incident on the life of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam, that after the martyrdom of Amirul Mu'mineen in 40 AH, Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam became the Khalifa, the fifth Caliph, and all the people who were living in Kufa came and played and did bayah of Imam Hassan. They all pledged allegiance to Imam Hassan. The one who refused to pay allegiance to Imam Hassan was none other than Muawiyah in Damascus. He had never paid allegiance to Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, and that conflict, basically continued. But one thing that Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam did, because when Muawiyah's army was facing him, and when his own people, and here it is, my dear brothers and sisters, these people who were in Kufa during the time of Imam Hassan and during the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they knew what the truth was. They knew where haqq was. But haqq was being corrupted with these low desires of survival, the desires of whatever it is that they deemed was more important than the haqq itself. There is a verse in the Holy Quran, and there is even a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that, even if it is costly to you, speak the truth when you are asked and when you are demanded to speak. Stand for the right. Because the heart of moving the other side is not only going to harm you, it can harm the society that is around you as well. And that's what happened to the Kufans. So one of the things, they started to betray Imam Hassan. The armies that were sent out to face Muawiyah, started to betray him. They started to move away. And Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam was attacked by the Kharijis. He was even wounded in his tent. Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam was forced to make a decision. If he was hungry for power, the entire Muslim treasury was in his hands in Kufa. Millions of dirhams. It was in his hand. It was not in Muawiyah's hand. It was Imam Hassan's hands. And he could have used those funds to consolidate power in the Muslim empire. He could have done it. Muslim empire had spread all over the place. But then he had to make a decision because the conflict with Muawiyah was causing bloodshed. The conflict with Muawiyah was disuniting the ummah. His father made a decision back in the day. And Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam had to make the decision. If Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam was tempted by his low desires, the desires of power and status, he would have never abdicated and given up power, to Muawiyah. I mean, these are the examples of the lessons that you and I, my dear brothers and sisters, have to learn from the Ahl Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. That when push comes to shove, we need to think with reason. We need to think with the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Holy Prophet, and Ahl Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. And we need to keep that ahead of our own lowly desires in whatever decision it is that we have to make. Let us raise our hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pray sincerely that these threats of the shaitaniyat that is really beginning to spread across the world does not come and to harm our communities, and worse than that, to step into the doors of our own homes. Let us pray that we never have to face these kinds of things. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, protect our children, protect our iman, and keep us on the right path, until the day it is that we have to go and face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We stop now because there is a rawza that's going to be recited by Sayyid Mustafa. Please recite a loud salawat.